As promised, here's the prequel, and boy, is this a doozy. The rabbit hole is deep, and I am barely scratching the surface. So earlier today, we released some information on tZero, and this one goes deeper into Patrick Byrne and the saga or theory or events around that man. So how did this start out? I'll jump into that in a moment. It all started with another YouTube video of all things, but this is digital insecurity. And what I like to do is as we go through life, often we put on our shoulders that this is our responsibility or our path or our way to figure out. And I 100% believe that we are responsible for our own destiny. Of course, with God's hand, as we'll get into. But we are responsible for the way we move our feet. And within that, we really have to understand that if in fact it is raining and all the rainwater is going in one direction, we will probably be forced with a heavy flood in that direction. So there are flows within society and decisions that are made for us, events that happen on 7-year cycles, 8-year cycles. Usually in Silicon Valley, we have a 7-year fiscal reset and we skip the last 7-year cycle. We're up for a doozy. You know these things, you can plan and prepare. But often when A matches B, there is a connection. And often it's known as a conspiracy theory, but we're way beyond that at this point. We're very mature and we can understand that when A seems to resemble something in B and something in C pops up as well, it's time to peel back the curtain and see who's operating the puppets back behind the screen. So here's a little path. Obviously, I can't answer many of the questions, but it will bring up some answer or some questions to help you delve deeper as well. So I really hope that you like this direction as an overlay to the digital security that we look at. So here we are back again. This is digital insecurity. This is the prequel to the tZero that we released earlier today. And I will go ahead and include that at the ending page here where you can click on it to see the tZero release that we did. And of course, there's a couple of articles I'm going to include, including the YouTube that I originally pulled this information from, which I highly, highly, highly suggest that you look at. It is amazing the depth of information comes out of that. So those links will be in the description for you as well. So let's go ahead and jump on in. This is what kicked it off for me. This is on YouTube. This is Fox News. Overstock CEO resigns after disclosure romance with Russian agent. That's the title, but there is a lot more in here. In fact, he even, well, we'll get into that. So this was released August 22nd, 2019. We all know what else was going on in August 2019. And I think that this was also the period of time when Steve Bannon was arrested, not by the FBI, of course, and not by the Southern District of New York that had been investigating him and the T organization. However, by the US Postal Service. And as you'll see, there's a thread here of surveillance with the US Postal Service. But again, this is Fox News, and this link will be provided so you can watch this. This is 22 minutes. And again, it is deep in information. So let's move forward. I actually prepared this prequel before I recorded the other one. So I had everything up and running. I'm going to pull in a little bit of information here. But one of the slides that I'm duplicating is this one from CoinDesk, where it says how economist Milton Friedman predicted the Bitcoin. And without going into it, because I went into it before, this was from March of 2014. And it just plainly states that Milton Friedman had predicted as far back as the 1990s the concept of digital money. Now, why again why am I bringing up Milton Friedman? As I pointed out in the other video, it's very interesting here. Patrick, as he was up and coming, he worked, I'm not sure that the role, maybe you could call it an intern, maybe but he was a subordinate to Milton. And Milton thought so highly of Patrick when in fact when Milton crossed over, he looked to Patrick to handle the assets that he'd gathered. And there was quite a bit. And Milton had family. In fact, his grandson resides here in Silicon Valley, primarily in San Francisco. In fact, that's maybe 6 or so years ago, his grandson was one of the parties trying to create an island off the coast of San Francisco, 3 miles off sea, so that in international waters, they could bring workers from overseas, have them close to land, and provide software programming type services was the idea there. So anyways, local here. But the bulk of the estate and the financial management of what Milton had created actually fell on the desk of Patrick. And Patrick really ran with this. There's actually YouTube videos that you can look up to find out more information about that relationship and what he did and how he embraced this role that I believe he was even blindsided that this much got put on him. But there's connections here. And the reason this came up is as we were digging into the story of the patent of tZero, we noticed that in 2017, when tZero was patented by Patrick, well, obviously through the patent agency, US PTO, but a woman became CEO. There was a change of guard in Nasdaq, and her last name is Friedman as well. And so again, I don't know if there's a direct relationship there, but kind of hard to see there isn't. So that might be a question that you want to look into. So what I wanted to do is look a little deeper here because there's just nothing coming up. And I want to let you know that we know this is as old as time. And I'm reminded by the story in Matthew, primarily around Matthew 28, when Jesus had passed and he had told everybody. His disciples knew of this. In fact, at the Last Supper, he no longer referred to his disciples as disciples. He then referred to them as his friends. Friends, please do this in remembrance of me. And then when he came back, he didn't refer to them as disciples or friends. He then referred to them as his brothers or brethren. But he had told them that in fact, this would be his path. And he sat there and said, please, Lord, if there is a way for this cup to pass, then let it pass. He didn't want to have to go through that, but knew that that was his destiny. And yet in this process, because he had announced it, once he passed, he was put in the tomb and the rock was put in front of it and it was sealed. But because it was well known what Jesus had taught, there were Roman guards that stood guard in front of the stone. And there's somewhere between 4 and 16. I don't have the exact amount. Different stories kind of give a different idea. But anyways, the idea is that these were probably fairly large individuals. They were Roman guards. They were told of this prediction that had been given. So at all costs, they were to stand guard and rotate. They were not to fall asleep. And they were to make sure that the disciples at no point broke the seal, broke into that, and took the body, and then to say that he had risen when in fact they had just stolen the body. But this is why this page looks at truth or lie. There's conspiracy around this that says that the guards just fell asleep and the disciples came in and took the body anyways. That's what they're saying. But there's a number of issues with that. And we won't go too far into that right now. But what I do want to show is there is evidence that in fact, these soldiers who clearly did not fall asleep because they would have been executed if that was the case, but instead they saw, as we are taught, the angels stand before them and one by one, they essentially passed out. Whether it was shock or fear, they hit the ground. And yet when they woke up and Jesus's body was gone, they were then approached. So this would have been through Pilate or one of his associates says, hey, look, we can't do this. We cannot let the people think that this happened. So they were all given money as we have seen, in order to lie and say that no, in fact, they all just fell asleep, that was their mistake, they shouldn't have fallen asleep, but they did, and during that time the disciples came in and took the money. Again, lots of problems with that story, but essentially, well, actually, if this theory is correct, they were bribed, and in order to protect their own butts, really, a CYA, and in order to protect their jobs, and then in order for a government to maintain a story, they paid these people off. And we have seen in this society today that a number of individuals are making a very handsome salary. In fact, a conversation I had today is, well, we'll get to that in a minute about CEOs and books. But there's multiple ways that those payoffs can come in. And in fact, these individuals would have received a payoff to make up another story, to lie, and to create the narrative. Now, this is so important because, again, this is as old as time, and this is what we're seeing right here. And I really think there's a lot more to this story once you watch that YouTube video. So here, Matthew 28, he goes a little bit more into the scenario if you want to read it, look it up, and jump more into that. But what I want to do is keep going down this other fork in the road right now. So over here in the YouTube article, Patrick, who admits his wrongdoing, says that he was approached by the three-letter agency twice before this time. And this time there were things that just didn't quite seem right, but he played into it anyways. However, at one point he was watching a congressional hearing, and Peter, this guy, stood up and gave a scenario related to the Russian dossier. And all of a sudden, Patrick's ears perked up and he said, wait a minute, those are the exact words. And he connected the dots and realized he'd been played. He realized, in a lack of a better situation, he had committed treason against his country. So what he did is he waited for a change of the guard, as we had a termination of Comey and changes with McCabe and all the changes that we saw going on there. And he finally found the change of the guard and thought that maybe he could trust the DOJ because he couldn't go to the other three-letter agencies. So he went to Barr. Now, what do we know about Barr? Barr resigned in December 14th, I believe it was. And 4 events happened immediately before that, in the 10 days heading before that. And I did that in another module here, but I think it was the 4th and the 6th and maybe the 8th. What he did was he was getting ahead of individuals in Congress that were potentially going to be blackmailed by the CCP. So he released information about Pelosi. He released information about Adam Schiff. He released information about Hunter Biden. The laptop came out. Now, it had already been released, but he dumped more. Now, of course, it never had Bill Barr's stamp on it or name, but based on the information that came out, it's been identified that these leaks probably came from him to get away from an absolutely on our knees scenario against the Chinese for extreme blackmail into our government. Lo and behold, where are we at today? So anyways, Patrick Byrne thought it would be safe to go ahead and go to this new guard at DOJ and tell him, hey, this is what happened. This is what I understood. This is what I was asked to do. Here's my bad. However, this is not right. He, of course, had plenty of documentation. They moved forward. He thought he could trust this. As we learned later, not really the place that we could trust. We don't know the depth of that, and we're waiting for that to come out. But what we do know is that there was a number of issues wrapped up in this that Patrick mentioned. One, in the article he mentioned, or in the YouTube, he mentioned an issue about blackmail. Now, I don't know if this is it, and I'm not going to click on this for obvious reasons, but he mentioned that that was a blackmail scenario against this individual was tied into it. But we do know that there are running counts, and you could see them here on this site, which we can normally not trust. So grain of salt, but there's quite a bit of information. And one of the most famous that keeps getting mentioned next to Jeff, of course, is Seth. Because the scenario of the passing is not at all possible in the way it was described. But there is a very, very long list. And they all seem to be tied in some way in this direction. However, as Peter said, relayed this information, as Patrick relayed this information, he also spoke more about other connections. And one thing that he mentioned here is there were three individuals, individual X, individual Y, and individual Z. And he dropped little names in there, and we can piece it together, but you got to do the math on your own. And essentially what it was pulling together to bring down the T organization. Now, apparently they weren't able to get close enough to T, so they went after T's son, T Jr. However, this information has come out in the news and has been reported that this person and Lisa Page conspired to leak the stories to mainstream media, and Patrick Byrne was a key player in piecing it together. Now, we have heard of different tribunals. We don't know if that's happening. We don't know the status, but we know that there's plenty of information out there and evidence to go with it. So what I wanted to do from here is take one more leak. Do you all remember there was this very strange case? There was a CEO that was reported missing. She was from, I think it was Utah. Let's see if it says here. I'm not seeing it fast enough here, but she was from another state, and she flew into California for a conference, and she met up with some different friends. She was a CEO of a cybersecurity company, and I believe they primarily outsourced overseas. But anyways, a very, very intelligent, well-connected individual. And at one point, I believe she then rented a car and drove from LA up to the San Francisco area and found herself in San Jose. However, there were a series of issues that happened along the way, and one of which is that she called her mom. And she told her mom, "We're in the Matrix." It was bizarre at best. But what was even more bizarre is then she went missing. And then she was found in a very quiet neighborhood, parked on a street where the neighbors said they hadn't noticed that car before that day. They hadn't seen it sitting there. There was nothing strange about it. And yet, as I recall, she was in the back seat, and it was identified that she must have passed from natural causes. The whole thing was very, very odd. And yet, as the family pushed for investigation, that just didn't get followed through based on the police reports that were released not long after. I'd worked through those, and also a little bit more about the ongoing information. So the scenario was odd in itself for a lot, just a number of reasons. But what was even more interesting is, as we're connecting the dots, Patrick Byrne spoke out about her. In fact, she had worked with him at Overstock. Now, as we saw post the time where we got to say who we wanted to move forward to live in the non-color building in DC, there were a number of individuals who met untimely deaths. And then the congressional opinion, when you raise your hand and give your count, changed. The threats are real, the actions are real, and the attacks are physical, if not permanent, as in this case. So here we have an individual who has been working with the three-letter agencies. Now, I have mentioned over and over again, back in the 70s, it is estimated that the CIA had almost 10,000 undercover agents just in San Francisco alone. So you can imagine what it is nationwide. We all know that the CIA's little CIA is Denver. And we also know that a lot of them retired to Costa Rica. As you follow the bigger picture of the movement, you can kind of figure out practice and training grounds. But back to this, so in the 70s, they had that many people, but these weren't people who'd gone through camp and recruited and graduated. This was the man who ran a liquor store, the postal service worker, somebody on a street corner that got a little extra cash every time they gave some money. They're spies like us. And so this individual, in his role and his connections with Friedman, had a lot of access that many of us will never experience in our lives, and had a lot of knowledge and was working on this patent. And yet somehow along the way, somebody that he respected in his organization went on to create her own company, ended up at a very odd demise. There is no way there's no connections here. So let's keep moving forward. So we know that decisions have been made that have not supported the constituents, you and I, taxpayers. And we found out in 2017 there was a little known fund, and this was reported by CNN on November of 2017 by MJ Lee, Sunlin Sarfadi, and Juana Summers. Congress paid out 17 million in settlements. Here's why we know little about that money. Two things have become painfully clear on Capitol Hill this week. Lawmakers and staffers say that this kind of specific harassment is rampant, but even members of Congress have no idea how widespread the problem is. This is why they all get blackmailed. It's not an accident. They are set up in many cases. Some of them lean that way anyways, and the setup is honestly not that difficult. But if you can get dirt on somebody, then they're now your puppet. Thus, we could throw in Biden's name at this point. The depth of corruption is mass. But the point is, how many of these little funds are they there, and how long have they been going on, and why as a taxpayer are we paying for these settlements? They didn't come out of their pocket. Another data point I'd like to point out in this story. So we're told that there's, a few intelligence agencies here in the United States. It was then announced that there's 17. We now know there's many, many more than this. I want to pause on this list. Of course, we're at Wikipedia right now, and I want to just take a moment to go through this. We have DNI, which we've heard of. So this is Office of Director of National Intelligence. And then we have, of course, CIA, we have DIA, we have NSA, NGA, NRO, Army Intelligence, Marine Corps Intelligence, Navy Intelligence, Air Force Intelligence, Surveillance and Reconnaissance Enterprise. That's USAF, ISR. And then we have USSF, ISR. That's the Space Force Intelligence, which, as I've said, is much more broader. It was disclosed in 2019. But that's not when it formed. And let's move forward. We have the United States Department of Energy. We have Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, OICI. We have Department of Homeland Security, DHS, Office of Intelligence and Analysis, Coast Guard Intelligence, United Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Office of National Security Intelligence, ONSI, United States Department of State, Bureau of Intelligence and Research, United States Department of Treasury. Yep, there you go. Office of Terrorism Financial Intelligence, and as I reported in other sections, the U.S. Postal Service Office of Intelligence and Investigations. Now, this list is what's been disclosed to us. Prior to this, this wasn't disclosed. How many others are out there that we're unaware of? Now, what's very interesting is if you're in one agency, you do not want to be outdone by another. Often they don't share databases. They compete for the information and they're backstabbing each other. In fact, we've learned that when drugs are being smuggled, it's a trifecta. There's always three being escorted at the same time, right? GUN, HUMAN, and of course, DRUG. So what we've learned here is it's a sick game. But I wanted to take time on this site because this isn't it in this world. I'm going to go down and then go back up. We've got Uruguay, Uzbekistan, Venezuela, Vietnam, Zambia. Look, there's multiples. You can just go through list of defunct agencies, which popped up in other ways, Zimbabwe. You move on through here, we've got Taiwan and Syria, Switzerland. Let's look at this list. Sweden, Sudan, Sri Lanka, Spain. Just look at this on and on. Look at all those intelligence agencies. Saudi Arabia, no lack there. On and up. Russia hasn't fully disclosed, correct? They've got only a handful mentioned here, but we just go on and on. Look at this. This is the Philippines, a whole page. And here we go, Pakistan. We're going to expect India to be rivaling Pakistan in intelligence. Netherlands, Mexico. I mean, these are massive. This goes on and on and on. Japan, Italy. All of these are intelligence agencies competing on, there's India's, competing against one another, backstabbing one another, sending in spies, trading information. It is amazing what all happens here. And of course, we have Colombia here, and that we've noticed came up. Let me just pull that again. Cuba. Here you go, Colombia. In relation to the event that just occurred in Haiti. That's a whole cycle of cash flow. And here we have our friends at this location. So my point is, intelligence is a business. We have the military industrial complex. We've got the manipulation of funds. We have the three main cities who control the planet. Of course, we've got the Vatican, London, and DC. And we've got these intelligence agencies that are always there to outdo one another. And this is what happened, according to Patrick, when he got played. And so the only way to get out of the blackmail that he would be facing is to get out in front of the story. And so that's why he went public. He not only went to the DOJ, he came out with the story. So what I wanted to do then is, once we get past intelligence agencies, we've also talked about the number of CEOs that are stepping down, and why is nobody talking about the mass resignations? These are CEOs and executives who, oh, by the way, just want to spend more time with their family. Not really the situation. So here in 2020, why is nobody talking about mass resignations of major CEOs? This was July 13, 2020, the Moray, and this is on Median, data-driven-investor.com. To date, by July 2020, well over 1,300 CEOs from massive corporations throughout the world had stepped down from their positions in the preceding 12 months. It's insane. They didn't sit down for altruistic or family reasons. And here's CNBC. 2019 had the most CEO departures on record with more than 1,600. This was published by Maggie Fitzgerald. A staggering 1,640 CEOs left their posts in 2019, the highest year on record since Challenger, Gray, and Christmas began tracking in 2002. It was even higher than 2008 when we were embroiled in the financial crisis. And they go through the list here. But remember, this is 2009. Before 2009, there had still been, what was it? We were at 5,000 to 6,000 that had suddenly stepped down since 2016. It's massive, the amount of leadership that we've lost. and they stepped down so quickly, there were not successors. This is yet another reason why the stock market cannot be at an all-time high without the trained leadership, because there's a vacuum, and with a global shutdown of a year to a year and a half and counting, the stock market is a fraud. So as we connect the dots here, I also wanted to point out earlier, and I said I would bring that up again, these individuals often they are fine, right? They're already making multi-million dollars a year. They left with golden handcuffs. They're well taken care of, because just in the time of Jesus, those who take the bribe usually live quite lavishly. And unfortunately, those who say they won't don't live any longer. You either play the game or you get to go back home with your maker. It is a corrupt world we live in, no matter what side of the coin you're looking at. This is a heads I win, tails you lose scenario. So I wanted to bring that back together here with tZero. Oh, the books. I want to talk about this. So one of the most popular that we'll see as far as payouts, well, there's two actually. So the first one is book deals. You and I know at this time, there's no money in books. If you're going to write a book, you're usually using it as a brochure, and the printing costs, they're either made to order or the printing costs are pretty expensive and they sit in a garage. In order for a publishing house and the New York Times and Amazon to promote these, they really have to have their own motivation and be part of the narrative in order to do that. In fact, this last year in particular, we've seen a lot of authors who've hit the #1 spot and then had their book erased, like it never existed on Amazon. But what's interesting is these individuals will step down from their role, and all of a sudden, they will have a multi-million or even $10 million book deal. That book deal is a payoff, because their book selling will never make that much money. And along with the book deals, then they can go to university, which is the game, as example, the Clintons like to play, and get paid $700,000 for a 15-minute speech. That's called a payoff. Now, the other section that we've learned about over the last few years is during the financial crisis, there was an art piece that sold, and I actually keep it on my refrigerator. I wasn't going to bring this up now, so I don't have it queued up. So I'll bring this up in another time. But it was a man getting hit, man struck by lightning, and 2 witnesses. The witnesses aren't even looking at the man struck by lightning. And it is a sketch that a preschooler would have done better. Plus, there's blood all over it. And yet that was the highest selling art piece ever. And as it's come out, in addition to payoffs of book deals and the following visit payment for speaking, we have this other category of contemporary art that really has no value. But if somebody pays for it, then they can move around their funds, write it off on taxes. It's a money laundering tactic, no matter how you want to look at it. So things just are not necessarily what we've already thought that they were, and the world is turning upside down. As we open our eyes and ears, again, these dots are starting to come together. So where does this bring this to? This is tZero.com, access to new securities. And again, we pointed this out before in the part 1 of the video. This is a prequel. This started out as a trading platform for cryptocurrency based on a new patented notion on how to secure the wallet and the trading. It when it began, it only traded Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the Raven coin over here, and now it's added some others. And as I pointed out before, you have Dogecoin there. You've got all of the Ox even. USDC is trading here too. So that's going to be an interesting one to watch. But again, you've got a scenario where this is in a sense, competing with the stock market. Because all those 401ks that people put away month by month and don't touch for 20, 30, 40 years is sucked out the back and used in other ways. And it's a house of cards. There is no transparency of where that money actually goes or why the stocks are going up and down, other than we know that it's manipulated. We saw it earlier in the year with GameStop. And we're going to see it over and over again. We saw it a few years ago with the big thumb hitting was the excuse we got, which we all know that that was a 3-letter initiative. So what I wanted to do was kind of tie this together. We've got somebody coming up with this brilliant idea that's going to bring truth, honesty, and turn the lights on. He is pulled into scenarios and tested to serve his country that he truly loves. And yet the tables get turned upside down as he learns the truth. And the lights continue to be turned on. So there's really a lot more to the story. And I've got to say, when Milton Friedman predicted the scenario of digital money, he probably had the conversation with Patrick at the time. And as we move forward, those conversations gelled. Overstock was launched. Out of Overstock parent company came out the idea of tZero the coin, and then tZero the platform or exchange. And all of a sudden, there is a major global threat. And out of that threat, actions happen. So again, we don't hear the whole story. We don't know the facts, but there are puzzle pieces being shown to us. And what we do with the puzzle pieces can help take our lives one step further. Again, there's no fear mongering here. There is just awareness, because the more educated you are and the more aware you are about the world around you, the better chance you have of making decisions that will keep you and your family safe, no matter what direction the market is going, no matter what job scenario we're in, no matter what the economic situation is or the global environment, because you've built your world on a foundation that's solid like a rock. This is digital insecurity. This has been the prequel to the tZero release that we did earlier today, and this delves into the Patrick Byrne saga. Again, I highly encourage you to take a peek at this YouTube video. It's an interesting scenario. Okay, digital insecurity. We'll post some more tomorrow.